Alright, hey guys, welcome to the fourth flipped video. Today we're going to cover Transcendentalism briefly, and then we're going to preload for Emerson's Self-Reliance, which you need to read over the weekend. So, to start, we've got Ralph Waldo Emerson. Emerson was one of the most important writers and thinkers of this era we're in. So we're looking at writing from 1820 to 1865. And in this era, Emerson is one of the big thinkers. Some consider him the most important writer of this era. He started his life as a minister, just like all his family that came before him. They were ministers in the Unitarian Church, and he found himself struggling through life with an attempt to establish his own identity. He wanted to be his own man. As he went on, he found himself kind of revolting against the family expectation. And you see this start to come through in his writing and his philosophy. So he becomes a minister. He had entered Harvard at the age of 14. He was very well read, very intelligent. He leaves Harvard, he becomes a minister, and he steps down pretty quickly. His wife dies from tuberculosis about a year and a half after they get married. And he takes her death extremely hard. Emerson finds himself starting to question some of the central doctrines of his religion. He finds himself struggling with the idea of individuals being insignificant in the grand scheme of things. He feels individuals have more importance. Individuals are higher up than some of the things it was teaching. And so this leads him to kind of start forming his own philosophy, his own ideas. And it's come to be known as Transcendentalism. And so he's kind of considered the father of Transcendentalism. He's one of the great Transcendentalist thinkers. And this was an era that came about the same time he's alive. And his writings kind of help establish this Transcendentalism idea. So if we look at what is Transcendentalism, there was a growing unease during this time in America with the Industrial Revolution. You had machinery starting to replace humans in the jobs they did and things like that. And so this goes back to the idea from the last slide that Emerson was having some trouble with about individuals being insignificant. And so he finds himself coming up with this philosophy that's kind of running counter to the Industrial Revolution. And it's centered around the idea that the divine truth, God, is present in all of us. We know what to do just intuitively. We don't have to learn it. It's a gut instinct. We just know. It's not about logic. It's not about the rational mind. We just intuitively are born with this idea of what's right, of what's true. And from this becomes the idea that kind of all of us, nature, all humans, we're all connected. That should say God right there. That was a typo. But we're all connected with God. We're all part of this together. Transcendentalism puts a large emphasis on nature, man's connection with nature, man's individuality, man's intuition. So that's kind of the school of thought Emerson helps form. And you'll see this show up through Self-Reliance as you're reading it, this idea of the individual and intuition and things like that. So, an important term to know for self-reliance is an aphorism. Self-reliance is full of a lot of little aphorisms. And an aphorism is really just kind of it's a short little quote. In today's day, it's a lot of like what you see people post on Facebook, post on Twitter. It's a little quote you can kind of live by. A couple that come from Self-Reliance that you'll see. He says things like, trust thyself. And so that's an aphorism. That's a little quote that speaks a general truth. You should trust yourself. The example, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's short, it's concise. It's not going to go on for a lot of lines. And so Self-Reliance has a lot of these little aphorisms that, if you think of it, you could just pull these little quotes out and put them on Facebook or Twitter and get a bunch of likes, or Instagram or Tumblr, whatever site you use. So, one of the ideas Emerson opens up with in Self-Reliance that you're going to want to be on the lookout for is that idea of intuition. All we can ever know is already within us. We intuitively, we naturally know what's right, what's wrong, what to do. Like he says in Self-Reliance, none but he knows what that is which he can do. We know in our gut what we're capable of, what we can do, what we believe. We don't need to be told. We don't need to be taught. It's not something we learn. It's just something we have. So this is an idea you're going to see coming through as you're doing your reading. Along with that idea is this idea of innate wisdom. Innate, again, just means kind of natural, intuitive. We just know it in our gut, in our heart. And so a big part of what you'll see in Self-Reliance as you're reading through is this idea of we should trust ourselves. Emerson says, opens with, or doesn't open with, but he says, trust thyself near the beginning of Self-Reliance. We know what we should do. We should have the confidence to follow through with this. He also, a central idea is this idea of believing in yourself, of trusting yourself, of trusting your intuition. He says this over and over. It may not seem very revolutionary or new to us today. We see it all the time in Disney movies, TV shows. The moral is always like, you should trust yourself, things like that. But in the 1800s, in this era that Emerson's writing this is a new idea. This is something people aren't used to being told. So it's radical. It's out there, and that shows up in his writing also. The idea that maybe your ideas are radical. That doesn't mean you shouldn't have them or you shouldn't hold them. You also don't want to let others interpret life for you. So kind of the Ophelia syndrome. That comes from Shakespeare. But that's the idea of other people telling you what your life should be. Here's what you should do with your life. Here's what you should feel. Here's what you should think. Things like that. It's really summed up in Emerson's title. You need to be reliant on yourself. It comes with you, and it's innate. You're born with it. It's inside of you already. Another big idea that comes through Self-Reliance is the idea of conformity, of fitting in. Emerson's a big believer in you need to be a nonconformist. You need to be you. You don't want to worry about fitting in. Just because everyone else is doing it doesn't mean that's what you should do. And he uses some bigger name examples when he says to be great is to be misunderstood. He points out people like Pythagoras, Socrates, Jesus have these ideas that were outside of the norm, that were nonconformist. And that's okay. It's almost an ideal. You want to be a nonconformist. You want to have ideas that are outside the norm. And that leads into the idea of consistency. You need to be, Emerson will say, well, right, you need to be open to new information. You should not hold the beliefs you have just because you've always held them. His quote is, speak what you think now in hard words. Tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradict everything you said today. So what you believe today may not be what you believe tomorrow if you get new information, if you get new ideas. You shouldn't be stuck in a mind thought. You need to don't worry about consistency. He says foolish consistency is for hobgoblins. That's one of his most quoted lines from this reading. The actual quote is, a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. And so when he's talking about little minds there, he's saying that small-minded people, unintelligent people worry about consistency, worry about making sure that they're always saying the same thing. If you get new information, you can have new ideas. That's perfectly okay. That's what Emerson's trying to tell us. So as you go through reading Self-Reliance, which is in your Google Drive, it's on the blog, what you're going to want to be thinking about are those ideas. And then a couple questions here. So Emerson's describing a type of person. This essay is him saying, here's how you should live your life. So as you're reading, you want to think about, what would this person Emerson's describing be like today? If this person Emerson's describing existed today, 2014, in high school, he was a high school student, he or she, what would they be like based on how Emerson is telling us to live our lives? What would they talk about? How would they talk? What kind of slang would they use? Things like that. What would they do? What would they participate in clubs? What kind of clubs? What would they do for fun? Jobs, things like that. What kind of clothing would they wear? What would their style be? What music would they listen to? Movies, books, things like that. So as you're reading, just think of that. Emerson is describing a person there. He's creating a character. He's saying this is how you should live your life. You should be this type of person. And so think about what type of person is he creating, especially if this person were alive today. And then you also want to think about, is it even possible? Emerson lays down some pretty strict ideas about how you should live your life. Some things that would be pretty difficult for most, if not everybody. And so you want to think about, is it even possible to live the way Emerson's describing? Or is it more of an ideal, something we should try to achieve, but we know we never will actually achieve? So as you're reading, you want to think through these kind of things. For more on transcendentalism or more on Emerson, you can click on the links below on the blog here, and that will take you to a more in-depth details about Emerson and transcendentalism. I hope you guys enjoy your weekend, and make sure as you're reading Self-Reliance that you're taking notes.